I always believed silence was a color, a deep, restorative emerald green that settled over my garden, just as the sun dipped behind the ancient oak tree at the far edge of the property. For the past 6 years, since Arthur passed, the silence had been my anchor, my chosen companion. I was 55, a widow who had successfully transitioned from living for someone to living with the earth. My life was measured in the slow, satisfying cadence of the seasons, the precise pH level of the soil, and the relentless, beautiful battle against the aphids. My sanctuary was perfect. The house was a modest, sturdy 2-story Victorian, surrounded by half an acre of meticulously cultivated English-style perennial borders. And next door, for 5 blissful, uninterrupted years, stood the Miller house, empty, quiet, and decaying, with a gentle dignity that never imposed. That dignity died precisely at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in late May. I was in my kitchen, unable to sleep, brewing a chamomile tea, when the noise began. It wasn't the sound of an ordinary moving van. It was the heavy, groaning hydraulic sigh of a commercial freight truck, followed by the kind of loud, unnecessary cursing usually reserved for dock workers or long-haul truckers stuck in traffic. I frowned, peering through the lace curtain. A massive black pickup truck, the size of a small tank, was parked illegally across the pavement. Behind it, illuminated by harsh, temporary spotlights, stood a man directing 2 very tired-looking movers. I didn't need to see the sold sign on the lawn to understand what was happening. The Miller house had finally been bought, and my emerald silence was about to be obliterated by a cacophony of modern life. I watched, horrified, as they unloaded what appeared to be the contents of a specialized warehouse. Massive, reinforced aluminum crates stamped with foreign customs labels, strange, heavy-duty electronics, and furniture that looked less like domestic comfort and more like military surplus. The man in charge, presumably the new owner, was tall, dressed in faded jeans and a thick, dark, grey thermal shirt, despite the mild night air. He moved with a restless, coiled energy, his dark hair messy, his face etched with fatigue that wasn't merely from the effort of moving, but from something deeper, something geographical. He looked like he'd just stepped off a plane from the other side of the planet, which, as I would soon discover, was precisely the case. I retreated back to the kitchen, clutching my tea, trying to invoke the spirit of Arthur, who would have simply slept through the ruckus. But I wasn't Arthur. I was Eleanor, and I valued order above almost everything else. The moving lasted until 4:30 a.m., ending with a loud thud that rattled the antique glass in my pantry door, followed by the terrifying sound of the massive pickup truck idling for 10 minutes before finally pulling away. I woke 3 hours later to the sound of a power saw. This was not acceptable. Not at 7:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. I pulled on my gardening jeans, a thick cotton shirt, and my sensible clogs. I didn't bother with makeup. If I was going to confront the destroyer of my peace, I wanted to look exactly like the stern, long-suffering neighbor I was. I marched across the lawn. The air already smelled different, not of freshly cut grass and damp earth, but faintly of ozone and jet fuel, a smell I associated with airports I'd only ever passed through. The man was in the backyard attempting to assemble a prefabricated metal shed. He was not using an electric screwdriver. He was using a heavy-duty drill that sounded like a dentist's nightmare. He stopped when my shadow fell over the pristine, untouched, and already slightly overgrown lawn. He straightened up slowly, stretching a muscular back that seemed to have been confined in tight spaces for too long. Up close, he was striking. His face was rugged, sun-weathered, and lined around the eyes that were a shockingly clear, light blue, currently narrowed against the morning sun. He had a short, neatly trimmed beard dusted with grey, and his hands, though rough, moved with surprising dexterity as he wiped grease from his forehead. "Morning," he said, his voice deep, gravelly, and carrying the slight, indefinable accent of someone who has spent too much time talking over the roar of engines. He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded pragmatic. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep the icy steel out of my tone, but failing spectacularly. I am Eleanor Vance. I live next door. He extended a hand, large and warm. Owen Sterling. Sorry about the racket last night, Eleanor, and this morning. I shook his hand briefly. His grip was firm, and the contact sent a flicker of unexpected warmth up my arm. I quickly withdrew my hand. It was extremely loud, Mr. Sterling, and the truck was blocking the pavement entirely. Yeah, that was my fault, he admitted, gesturing. He vaguely toward the shed kit. I'm on a tight schedule. I only have about 36 hours here before I have to leave again. I needed to get this storage assembled and secured before I go. 36 hours, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Are you a consultant? Or perhaps a traveling salesman? He chuckled, a short, dry sound. Something like that. I'm a pilot. Cargo. It means I live mostly in reverse. When you're sleeping, I'm landing in Singapore. When you're eating breakfast, I'm crossing the date line. Ah, I said, finally understanding the strange fatigue and the odd collection of luggage. So, you are the human embodiment of jet lag. That's one way to put it. He grinned, and the tired lines around his eyes softened, giving him a sudden, boyish charm that irritated me. Look, I genuinely apologize for the noise. I'll be gone by tomorrow evening, and then you'll have peace and quiet for 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Give or take, depends on the route. He picked up the drill again. Now, if you don't mind, I really need to finish this. It's got specialized equipment going in it that can't stay exposed to the elements. I hesitated. He wasn't malicious, just utterly absorbed in his own urgent, time-warped world. But I hadn't come over just to complain about the noise. Mr. Sterling, I began, gesturing toward the back of my own property. While I appreciate the need for security, I must address the boundary line. He followed my gaze. My garden was separated from the Miller house by a low, weathered stone wall, a boundary that had been respected for decades. Yes? He prompted. Your movers? Or perhaps you appear to have dumped several large cardboard boxes, a stack of wooden pallets, and what looks like a broken engine part over the wall and directly onto my award-winning petunia bed. Owen looked genuinely surprised, then quickly walked toward the stone wall. He winced when he saw the crushed pink and purple blooms. Oh, damn. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Those guys must have just tossed the rubbish over the nearest barrier. That was completely careless. He vaulted the low wall with surprising agility for a man his size, landing lightly on my side of the boundary. He immediately began picking up the debris, his large hands careful as he lifted the broken engine part, a piece of gleaming high-tech metal, off the bruised flowers. This is unacceptable, Mr. Sterling, I stated firmly, remaining on his side of the boundary, emphasizing the transgression. My petunias are entered into the regional flower show next month. This damage is significant. He stopped, holding the heavy debris, looking from the crushed flowers to me. I understand. Look, I'll replace them. I'll send a landscaper over today. Just tell me what kind they were. They were my petunias, I corrected him sharply. They were cultivated, nurtured, and loved. They are not replaceable by a generic landscaper from a phone book. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He was clearly used to dealing with complex logistical problems, not the delicate sensibilities of a dedicated gardener. All right, Eleanor, he said, his voice softening slightly, tinged with a weary patience. What is the appropriate penance for the destruction of your prize-winning blossoms? Because I promise you, I didn't move across the country just to antagonize my quiet neighbor. His directness caught me off guard. Most people, when confronted, would become defensive or dismissive. Owen was just tired and ready for a solution. The penance, I said, crossing my arms, is that you will understand that this is not a layover airport hotel. This is a residential neighborhood, and my garden is sacred. You will respect the boundaries, and you will cease all loud activity between the hours of 9 p.m. and 8 a.m. He nodded seriously. Done. I can adhere to that. I'll be asleep during most of those hours anyway, or gone entirely. He gathered the last of the debris. Now, about these petunias. Let me at least pay for the loss. No, I shook my head. Just fix the wall and clean up the yard. It looks like a junkyard exploded. He looked around his new backyard, which was indeed littered with crates, tools, and the remnants of the shed kit. Fair enough. I'm operating on soul time, so I'll be pulling an all-nighter to get this done. I promise, by the time I leave tomorrow evening, this place will look respectable. He stepped back over the wall, placing the debris into a large industrial bin. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, I said, the formality a necessary barrier between us. Owen, he corrected, turning back to face me, leaning against the stone wall. He wiped his brow again, leaving a streak of dirt. Call me Owen. And let me ask you something, Eleanor. Yes? You seem very focused on this garden. Is this your profession? It is my passion, I corrected him. It is my life now. He studied me for a long moment, his blue eyes intense, taking in my muddy clogs and the fierce protectiveness in my posture. My life is mostly logistics, elevation, and time zones, he mused. But I admire passion, whatever the subject, especially when it involves something that grows. I felt a faint blush creep up my neck. His gaze was entirely too penetrating. It was the first time in years I felt truly seen by a man, and not just as Arthur's widow or the quiet woman next door. If you'll excuse me, Owen, I said stiffly, I have damage control to attend to. Right, and I have a shed to build. He gave a quick, slightly lopsided smile. I'll see you in a couple of weeks then, Eleanor. When I'm on a normal schedule, maybe I can actually apologize properly. I didn't respond, simply turning and walking back across my lawn. As I knelt down to inspect the crushed stems of my beloved petunias, I could feel the low, insistent hum of his power drill starting up again. A constant, grating reminder that my quiet world had been irrevocably invaded by a man who lived perpetually between here and somewhere else. The next 36 hours were loud, but Owen was true to his word. The noise stopped precisely at 9 p.m. and did not resume until 8 a.m. In the intervening quiet hours, I could hear the faint rhythmic sound of heavy hammering and low, muttered instructions coming from his backyard. He was working through the night, fueled by caffeine and the strange energy of the displaced. When I woke up on Friday morning, the Miller house, now the Sterling house, was transformed. The backyard was spotless. The shed was complete, a sturdy, grey, metal structure secured with a heavy-duty lock. The lawn was cleared, and even the overflowing trash bins had been neatly contained. And on the stone wall, placed carefully so as not to disturb the surrounding flora, was a small white envelope addressed simply, Eleanor. I approached cautiously. Inside the envelope was a thick folded piece of paper, a diagram, meticulously drawn in neat, precise handwriting. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a map of my garden, specifically the damaged area. Underneath the map, written in the same hand, was a note. Eleanor. I'm gone, off to transport some highly necessary widgets to the Philippines. I managed to fix the yard, and I hope the noise didn't drive you completely mad. Regarding the petunias, I know they are irreplaceable, but I also know that award-winning gardeners like yourself have standards. I took the liberty of researching the exact cultivar, Petunia hybrida tidal wave, hot pink and velvet purple. I contacted the only specialty nursery in the state that carries them in the correct stage of growth. They will be delivered to your house this afternoon at 3 p.m. along with a custom soil enrichment kit, certified organic. Please consider it a down payment on my future good behavior, and if they don't meet your exacting standards, feel free to send me a strongly worded email. My work email is on the back of this sheet. I'm always awake somewhere. See you in 2 weeks. Owen. I stared at the note, my heart doing a strange little flip-flop. He hadn't just apologized, he had researched. He had identified the precise strain of petunia I was growing, a feat that required genuine effort, as I had ordered them from a specialized seed catalog. I turned the paper over. Beneath his name was a professional-looking email address, and beneath that, scrawled in a more hurried script, P.S. I noticed your rose bushes look a little sparse this year. Try adding a bit of bone meal and maybe a light application of neem oil for those black spots. Just a suggestion from someone who sees a lot of different climates. I felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of annoyance mixed with a profound sense of validation. How dare he critique my roses? And yet, how did he know about the black spots? He had been watching. I spent the rest of the day in a state of agitated anticipation. I told myself I was only waiting for the petunias, ensuring they arrived intact and with the correct variety. At 3:05 p.m., a specialized nursery truck pulled up. The delivery man, a nervous young man named Kyle, carefully unloaded 2 large flats of the most perfect, vibrant pink and deep purple petunias I had ever seen. They were mature, blooming specimens, far exceeding the quality of the ones I had lost. Mr. Sterling insisted on the highest grade, ma'am, Kyle explained, looking slightly overwhelmed by the sheer size of the order. He paid extra to have them flown in overnight from the greenhouse. Flown in. Of course they were. The man moved flowers the way he moved industrial machinery. I accepted the delivery, the rich, damp earth smell of the new plants filling my senses. They were beautiful. They were perfect. And they were a gift from the man who had shattered my silence and then, in the most complicated way possible, tried to repair it. I planted the new petunias immediately. The work was therapeutic, allowing me to channel my lingering frustration into the satisfying task of tamping down the soil. I finished just as the sun began to set, casting that restorative emerald light over the garden once more. The silence returned, deeper and more profound now that the threat was gone. But it was a different silence. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the knowledge that in 2 weeks, the chaos and the owner of the startling blue eyes would return. I realized I hadn't replied to his note. I didn't want him to think I was easily placated. I went inside, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I typed out a concise, professional email. To Owen Sterling, sterlingglobalfreight.com. Subject, petunias. Owen, the plants arrived and were of satisfactory quality. Thank you for the generous replacement. I have noted your observation regarding my roses. I assure you, my pest management protocols are strictly observed. I look forward to 2 weeks of uninterrupted peace. Eleanor Vance. I hit send. It was curt, factual, and dismissive. Less than 30 seconds later, a reply popped up in my inbox. He was, as promised, awake somewhere. To Eleanor Vance. Subject, petunias. Glad the petunias met regulation. I apologize for the unsolicited rose advice. It's hard to turn off the logistics brain, even when looking at something beautiful. Enjoy the silence, Eleanor. Though I hope you don't enjoy it too much. I might have a proposition for you when I get back. P.S. I'm currently flying over the Arabian Sea. It's midnight here. The stars are incredible. My heart hammered against my ribs. A proposition? What kind of proposition could a cargo pilot possibly have for a widow who preferred the company of mulch to men? I didn't reply. I simply shut the laptop, stood up, and went to check on my roses. I hated to admit it, but those black spots were bothering me. And I suddenly found myself wondering, what did the Arabian Sea look like at midnight? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine and anticipation. I meticulously tended the garden, but my focus was fragmented. Every time a plane flew overhead, I wondered if it was him, crossing the sky, carrying industrial equipment and my secret petunia seeds. I found myself Googling his flight routes. Shanghai, Dubai, Anchorage. The sheer scale of his life made my own feel small, contained, and suddenly slightly suffocating. I realized I missed the noise. The intrusion had injected a strange energy into my quiet neighborhood. I even applied the neem oil to the roses, just in case. On the morning of the 14th day, I was pruning the hydrangeas when I heard the low, rumbling growl of the black pickup truck pulling into his driveway. I didn't turn around immediately. I continued clipping, counting to 10, trying to regain my composure. He was back. I heard the heavy slam of the truck door, followed by a grunt of exhaustion. Eleanor, his voice called out, tired but cheerful. The peace treaty is officially over, and I brought souvenirs. I finally turned. He looked even more rugged than before, wearing a faded blue t-shirt and cargo shorts. He carried a duffel bag over one shoulder, and dangling from his other hand was a small, intricately carved wooden birdcage, empty. "Good afternoon, Owen," I said coolly, dusting off my hands. "I see you made it back in one piece." "Just barely," he grinned, walking toward the stone wall. He looked completely out of sync with the morning sunlight. His eyes were bloodshot, but the blue was still startlingly vivid. "I'm running on fumes and 3 cups of instant coffee from a truck stop outside of Frankfurt." He vaulted the wall again, landing this time directly on the path, respecting the flower beds. "I need to sleep for about 12 hours, he confessed, leaning closer, and I caught the faint scent of foreign spices mixed with his own unique smell of ozone and sweat. "But first, I needed to deliver these." He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out 2 flat, beautifully packaged boxes. "For the garden," he said, handing me the first one. It was heavy. I opened it. Inside were the most exquisite professional-grade gardening shears I had ever seen, crafted from Damascus steel with polished walnut handles. "They're handmade in Japan," he explained. "I had a layover in Osaka. I figured someone who cares about precision deserves the right tools." I was speechless. I ran a thumb over the polished metal. They were magnificent. "And this," he said, handing me the second box, which was wrapped in thick, colorful paper. "This is from the Philippines." I opened it slowly. Inside was a small ceramic planter, shaped like a stylized smiling sun, filled with rich, dark soil. Nestled in the soil was a single, tiny, vibrant green sprout. "It's a rare variety of dwarf jasmine," he explained, his voice low and earnest. "It only blooms at night. I thought maybe you could put it outside your kitchen window so when you're awake in the dark, you have something beautiful to smell." My throat tightened. He didn't just see the gardener, he saw the lonely widow who couldn't sleep. "Owen," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "These are incredibly thoughtful. You shouldn't have." "I wanted to," he said simply. "It's hard to find gifts for a woman who already has everything, Eleanor. But maybe I found something that fits your rhythm." He paused, looking directly at me. The jet lag couldn't mask the serious intent in his eyes. "And now, about that proposition," he continued, leaning slightly closer, forcing me to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "I've decided I need a full-time logistics manager for my life. Someone who understands scheduling, precision, and the necessity of order." I blinked. "You want to hire me as an assistant?" He laughed, a genuine, tired sound. "No, I want to hire you as a travel companion." He stepped back, gesturing with the empty wooden birdcage. "I fly cargo all over the world. The routes are set, but the downtime isn't. I spend 48 hours in places like Kathmandu, Santiago, or Helsinki, completely alone. I eat bad hotel food and look at landmarks from the window of a taxi." "And you want me to, what, join you?" I asked, utterly bewildered. "I have a lot of unused companion passes," he said, shrugging, "and I have a lot of beautiful places I'm forced to see quickly. I need someone who can appreciate a rare bloom in the Himalayas, or tell me the history of a mosque in Morocco, while I try to keep my internal clock straight." He paused, letting the absurdity of the idea sink in. "Think of it, Eleanor," he urged, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "You, the mistress of order in the earth, traveling with me, the master of chaos in the sky. I get a proper, sane travel guide, and you get a change of scenery that's a little more exciting than the annual regional flower show." "Owen," I said, shaking my head, a slow smile starting to tug at the corner of my mouth despite myself. "I have not left this continent in 20 years. I wear clogs, not sensible walking shoes for global travel. And I certainly do not travel with strange men I've known for less than 48 hours. "You know me better than that," he corrected me gently. "You know I respect boundaries. I pay my debts, and I understand the difference between a common petunia and a tidal wave hot pink." He paused, his blue eyes holding mine. "Besides, I could use someone to make sure I don't accidentally ship myself home in a crate." He was ridiculous. He was exhausting, and he was offering me the escape I hadn't realized I desperately needed. "I need to sleep, Eleanor," he said, backing toward the stone wall. But I need an answer before my next route is finalized. I leave Saturday night. He stepped over the wall, picked up his duffel bag, and gave me a final tired salute. Think about it. We could be looking at the midnight sun together. I stood there, surrounded by my beautiful ordered garden, holding the exquisite Japanese shears and the tiny night-blooming jasmine. Midnight sun. I had 2 days to decide if I was ready to trade my emerald silence for the roar of a jet engine and the companionship of the most disruptive man I had ever met. Narrator note to audience. What do you think, readers? Should Eleanor abandon her quiet life for an adventure with the mysterious pilot Owen? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for part 2. The phrase midnight sun was an anomaly, a geographical impossibility in my carefully controlled world. Everything about Owen was an anomaly. He was a force of nature, or perhaps a force of global logistics that had crashed into the quiet bay of my life. I spent the rest of Saturday morning pacing the borders of my property, the Damascus shears still clutched in my hand. He had given me the tools of my trade, recognizing the dedication, but he had also offered me an escape route, wrapped in the promise of exotic night blooms. I looked at the jasmine. It was so small, so fragile, yet it had traveled across oceans to reach me. Had I become too rooted, too afraid of the journey? For 6 years, I had honored Arthur's memory by preserving the life we built together. But Arthur had loved adventure, though his adventures were mostly confined to books and documentaries. He had always encouraged me to see the world. When he died, I didn't stop traveling because I was grieving. I stopped because the administrative effort of moving through airports and time zones seemed pointless without him. Now, Owen was offering to handle the logistics. He was offering to be the pilot, the navigator, and the human shield against the inconvenience of travel. All I had to do was show up. The fear was sharp and real. Fear of the unknown, fear of motion sickness, fear of leaving the delicate balance of my garden unattended. But beneath the fear, a small, reckless spark ignited. It was a thrill I hadn't felt since I was 25, packing a backpack for a spontaneous trip to the Lake District. By noon, the decision was made. I couldn't articulate the reason beyond a sudden visceral need to move, to breathe air that hadn't filtered through my own oak trees for decades. I changed out of my gardening clothes, pulled on a tailored linen dress, something I hadn't worn since a wedding 3 years, ego, and walked next door. The front door of the Sterling house was slightly ajar. I knocked firmly on the frame. "Come in." Owen's voice boomed from somewhere deeper inside. I stepped into a scene of organized chaos. The living room was sparsely furnished, mostly military-grade storage containers masquerading as tables. But there were maps everywhere. Large, rolled-up aeronautical charts covered the walls, held up by masking tape. The faint, metallic smell of ozone was still present. Owen emerged from a hallway, looking significantly less tired now, though still operating on some internal reversed clock. He wore a fresh, dark polo shirt and was meticulously polishing a pair of heavy-duty boots. "Eleanor," he said, straightening up, his eyes widening slightly as he took in my non-gardening attire. "Wow, you clean up nice." "Thank you, Owen," I replied, maintaining a professional distance. "I believe I owe you an answer regarding your rather unusual proposition." He dropped the polishing cloth and leaned back against a wall, crossing his arms. The movement highlighted the powerful build beneath the shirt. "I'm ready. Just know that if the answer is no, I'm going to spend the next 48 hours trying to convince you otherwise." "The answer," I stated clearly, "is yes." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, lighting up his eyes like a runway flare. "Yes? Seriously? Eleanor Vance is trading her petunias for passport stamps?" "On certain conditions," I stipulated quickly, lifting a finger. "First, this is strictly a professional arrangement. I am your logistical and cultural guide, nothing more. Secondly, I need precise itineraries and adequate notice for the next rotation. My garden requires 2 weeks of specialized, scheduled care in my absence." "Done," he agreed instantly, pushing off the wall. "I wouldn't dream of messing with your schedule, Eleanor. I respect the necessity of order. And as for the rest, duly noted." He paused, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. But I reserve the right to buy you dinner in whichever exotic locale we land. Dinner is acceptable, I conceded. Now, where are we going? He grinned, walking over to a large map of the Americas pinned to the wall. He tapped a point near the bottom of the continent. Santiago, Chile. Departure tonight at 11 p.m. from the regional cargo hub. We'll be there for about 28 hours. Then a quick refuel in Buenos Aires and back home. Santiago. The name resonated with crisp foreign energy. Chile, I breathed. I need my passport, and I need to arrange for Mrs. Henderson to come twice a day for the watering. Owen was already pulling a laminated folder from a desk drawer. Your itinerary is printed. I took the liberty of filling out the forms for the companion pass. Your passport photo is already on file from the time you renewed your driver's license. I stared at him. How did you get my driver's license? Photo. He shrugged, completely unfazed. Logistics, Eleanor. I had a few friends in the right places run a quick security clearance. Necessary paperwork for international travel. That is extremely invasive, Owen. It's efficient, he corrected, handing me the folder. Now, the important part. Packing. Santiago's heading into winter. Bring layers and ditch the clogs for something that can handle cobblestones. We spent the next hour in a flurry of preparation that felt more like a mission briefing than packing for a holiday. He explained the nature of his work, transporting specialized mining equipment, the security protocols, and the need for absolute punctuality. He watched as I meticulously packed my small, sturdy suitcase, dividing clothing into vacuum-sealed bags. You pack like you're loading a freighter, he observed, leaning in the doorway. I pack like I respect the weight limit, I countered, snapping the suitcase shut. I like that, he murmured. Order in. The face of entropy. I felt the familiar tension rising between us, a strange mix of irritation and attraction. He was so close, and his focus was so absolute. I took a deep breath, needing a moment to process the sheer audacity of my decision. I was leaving in less than 12 hours for another continent with a man who had stalked my public records. Narrator note to audience, a quick pause in our story. Eleanor is making a huge leap of faith. I'd love to hear what you think of her decision. Tell me in the comments below. What city are you listening from, and what score, 0 to 10, would you give the story so far? Your feedback helps shape the rest of Eleanor and Owen's journey. Now, back to the adventure. The rest of the afternoon was dedicated to the garden. I left detailed, color-coded instructions for Mrs. Henderson, outlining the precise watering times for the greenhouse and the specific organic fertilizer schedule for the hydrangeas. It was my final act of adherence to the life I was temporarily abandoning. As dusk settled, I retreated to my bedroom. I put on the outfit I had chosen. Dark, tailored trousers, a silk cream blouse, and a thick burgundy cashmere wrap. Practical, elegant, and ready for a long flight. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was 55, slightly nervous, and suddenly, thrillingly alive. At 10:30 p.m., the sound of the massive black pickup truck idling in my driveway was no longer grating. It was the call to adventure. I grabbed my small suitcase and the essential item Owen had insisted upon, a heavy-duty noise-cancelling headset. I locked the door, taking one last look at my perfectly manicured lawn bathed in moonlight. Owen was waiting by the truck, leaning against the massive hood. He wasn't wearing his pilot uniform yet, just the dark polo, but he had a structured black leather bomber jacket thrown over one arm. He looked less like a neighbor, and more like an operative waiting for extraction. Ready to break? Some rules, Eleanor? He asked, taking my suitcase before I could protest. I am ready to observe proper customs procedures, Owen, I corrected him, but my voice lacked its usual sternness. The drive to the cargo hub was fast and silent. The air was thick with anticipation. You know, Owen began, his eyes fixed on the dark road. When I offered you this, I assumed I'd get a polite, firm refusal. I didn't think you'd actually say yes. I surprise myself sometimes, I admitted, looking out at the blurring landscape. Why did you ask me, Owen? Honestly, you could have asked anyone. He glanced at me, his blue eyes catching the reflection of a street lamp. I could have asked a lot of people. But I needed someone who saw the world differently. Most people I travel with are either pilots, mechanics, or logistics brokers. They see numbers, fuel consumption, and deadlines. And what do you think I see? You see life, he said simply. You saw the difference between a generic petunia and a tidal wave hot pink. You see the effort required for something to thrive. I spend my life moving things that are dead or inorganic. I need a reminder that there's beauty and growth happening down there, on the ground. The sincerity in his voice was disarming. And you also needed a distraction, I added softly. He nodded, a weary admission. That too. The silence in those hotel rooms gets heavy. It's hard to stay grounded when you're always chasing the sun. We pulled into a high-security area near the airport perimeter, far from the bustling passenger terminals. The air here vibrated with power and the metallic tang of jet fuel. Welcome to my office, Eleanor, Owen said, pulling the truck up to a massive hangar door guarded by a chain-link fence. He flashed a badge, spoke rapidly into a speaker, and the gate slid open with a hydraulic hiss. We walked into the cavernous hangar. The air was cool and filled with the scent of oil and cold metal. In the center, dwarfing everything else, sat a massive grey Boeing 747 freighter. It looked like a slumbering whale. That's our ride, Owen said, pointing to the plane. The spirit of global commerce, as we affectionately call her. Inside, the atmosphere was utilitarian and intense. Owen quickly shed his civilian persona, transforming into the professional Captain Sterling. He donned his uniform, crisp white shirt, epaulettes, and the leather jacket. He introduced me to his co-pilot, a quiet, serious woman named Maria, and the flight engineer, a jovial man named Ken. Eleanor is our cultural attaché and temporary sanity check, Owen explained with a wink. I sat in the jump seat of the cockpit, feeling utterly out of place, as they ran through the pre-flight checks, their language a rapid-fire sequence of technical jargon and acronyms. At 11:45 p.m., the massive engines roared to life. The vibration felt deep in my bones. Ready for launch, Eleanor? Owen asked, his voice calm over the headset. Ready, Captain, I replied, gripping the sides of my seat. The takeoff was nothing like a commercial flight. It was a heavy, relentless push into the night sky. When we finally leveled off, the world below was a scattering of lights, and above, the black expanse of space was infinite. Owen turned slightly in his seat, his uniform immaculate, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the instrument panel. We'll be crossing the equator in about 6 hours, he murmured. Try to get some sleep. I've set up a bunk for you back in the rest area. I looked out the window. My garden, my home, my life of emerald silence was miles and hours behind me. I stood up and made my way back to the small, surprisingly comfortable rest area. It was partitioned from the main cargo hold, which was a vast empty space ready to be filled with the weight of the world on the return journey. I lay down on the narrow bunk, the low, powerful hum of the engine surrounding me. It was not the silence I knew, but it was a different kind of peace, the peace of relinquishing control. I woke up roughly 9 hours later. The cabin was bright with artificial light, and the sun was streaming fiercely through a small window. I felt disoriented, heavy, and strangely buoyant. I found Owen in the cockpit, still in the pilot seat, sipping coffee. Welcome to Thursday morning, Eleanor, he greeted me cheerfully. We crossed the date line about an hour ago. We're over the Andes now. You might want to take a look. I walked over to the window, peering down. Below us, jagged snow-capped peaks pierced the clouds, the spine of the continent, breathtaking in its scale and indifference to human life. It's magnificent, I whispered. It is, Owen agreed, his eyes focused on the horizon. But remember why we're here. We land in Santiago in 2 hours. We are on the clock. The landing in Santiago was smooth, professional, and efficient. We were processed quickly through cargo customs. The air outside the terminal was crisp and cool, smelling faintly of mountains and damp earth. Owen led me to a waiting car. He was all business, giving instructions in rapid Spanish to the driver. We have exactly 27 hours, Owen explained, settling into the back seat. I have a meeting with the mining company at 3 p.m. Until then, you are my guide. What is the most important thing I need to see in Santiago that has nothing to do with aviation or logistics? I pulled out the itinerary I had quickly researched on the flight. My mind, usually focused on the microclimate of my garden, was suddenly expanding to encompass an entire city. We start at the Cerro Santa Lucia, I declared, adjusting my cashmere wrap. It's a historical hill park in the city center. It was once a fortress, but now it's a beautiful garden. It will give us the best vantage point of the city and the mountains. Owen leaned back, a genuine look of pleasure on his face. A garden, fortress. Perfect. Lead the way, Eleanor. We spent the next 4 hours moving through Santiago at a rapid clip, yet with a precision that satisfied even my exacting standards. Owen was an intense companion. He didn't just look at a landmark, he absorbed it. He listened intently as I recounted the history of the colonization and pointed out the specific Chilean flora I recognized. We walked through the Plaza de Armas, the heart of the city, bustling with people. I felt 1,000 miles away from the quiet solitude of my English lane. The juxtaposition is incredible, I observed as we sat down for a quick lunch of empanadas at a small crowded cafe. 1 minute, I'm worrying about aphids. The next, I'm looking at the presidential palace. Owen laughed, wiping flour from his beard. That's the beauty of living on the edge of the map, Eleanor. It makes the small things back home even more precious. As we ate, our conversation drifted away from tourism and logistics. We talked about Arthur. The first time I'd spoken about him openly to a stranger in years. Owen listened quietly, letting me paint a picture of our shared, predictable life. He sounds like a good man, Owen said when I finished. He gave you roots. He did, I agreed. And you, Owen? What gave you roots? He paused, looking down at his coffee. I don't have them, not really. My parents were in the military, we moved constantly. I joined the Air Force straight out of school. I've been airborne ever since. I own the house next door because I needed a place to park my stuff, not because I needed a home. That sounds lonely, I ventured. Sometimes it is, he admitted, meeting my gaze. But it's also free. The only schedule I have to answer to is the flight plan. Until now, maybe. His implication hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. I need to leave for the meeting now, he announced, checking his watch. I'll be tied up for 2 hours. I've instructed the driver to take you to the botanical garden. You can indulge your passion for Chilean natives. I'll meet you there at 5:30 p.m. We have a dinner reservation at 7. A dinner reservation? Formal apology for the petunias. He smiled, that tired, genuine warmth returning. Don't be late, Eleanor. Time is an illusion, but reservations are real. He left, and I was suddenly alone in a foreign city, clutching my small map. The botanical garden was a sanctuary. I wandered through groves of ancient trees and specialized cacti collections, feeling the deep satisfaction of recognizing the Latin names and the specific soil needs of the plants. Here, in the heart of this frantic foreign city, I found my familiar rhythm. At 5:30 p.m. precisely, Owen arrived. He was back in civilian clothes, dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, looking less like a pilot and more like a handsome, slightly rumpled professor. Find any new species? He asked, walking toward me where I was admiring a massive Chilean palm. Dozens, I said, my voice rich with satisfaction. I took notes. I believe I've identified the perfect companion plant for the shaded area near my shed. He laughed, offering me his arm. Of course you did. Come on. I need to feed you before I crash for the night. Dinner was in a beautiful, dimly lit restaurant overlooking the city. The Chilean wine was excellent, and the conversation was effortless. We talked about everything except the future. We talked about the physics of flight, the history of specialized cargo, the necessity of pruning, and the surprisingly similar meticulousness required for both of our professions. As the evening wore on, the jet lag finally caught up to Owen. His voice grew softer, and the blue of his eyes seemed to dim slightly. I have the hotel room for the night, he said, pushing his plate aside. We need to be at the airport by 7 a.m. I apologize, Eleanor. I'm running on 3 days of borrowed time. It's quite all right, Owen, I assured him. I understand. I am tired myself. He paid the bill, and we took a quiet taxi ride back to the hotel near the airport. We walked into the small, elegant lobby. Owen handed me a key card. Room 402, he said. I'm 403. Adjacent rooms. I'll knock at 6:30 sharp. I nodded, taking the card. Our hands brushed, and the contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through me. It was the first moment since his return that the professional barrier felt truly thin. Thank you for today, Owen, I said sincerely. It was invigorating. Thank you, Eleanor, he replied, leaning slightly closer. His exhaustion seemed to pull him towards me. You make the world feel real again. He held my gaze for a moment, and I thought, for a terrifying, thrilling second, that he might kiss me. But he simply gave a tired smile, turned, and walked toward his room. I let out the breath I didn't realize I was holding, and walked into room 402. It was a beautiful room, but I noticed. I walked straight to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. The sky was dark, vast, and utterly foreign. I was in Santiago, Chile. I had traveled halfway around the world with a man I barely knew, and I had never felt more awake. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., stripped down to my silk pajamas, and crawled into the cool sheets. As I drifted off, the only sound was the distant rumble of a jet engine. Owen's world, now partially mine. The next morning was a rush. Owen was prompt, knocking exactly at 6:30 a.m. We grabbed a quick breakfast and were back at the airport, preparing for the leg to Buenos Aires. The return journey was even more intense. We had loaded the specialized mining equipment, and the great whale of a plane was heavy. The flight felt more physical, more demanding. Owen was focused, professional, and remote. I watched him work, recognizing the intense responsibility he carried. In the jump seat, crossing back over the Andes, I realized something critical. I wasn't just interested in Owen Sterling, the neighbor. I was captivated by Captain Sterling, the man who navigated the skies. We landed back at the cargo hub late Saturday night, precisely 48 hours after we had left. I was exhausted, but energized. As we drove back toward our quiet lane, the massive black truck now feeling like a familiar cocoon, the silence of the residential neighborhood felt almost deafening after the roar of the engines. We made good time, Owen said, pulling up to my driveway. We're back on schedule. You have exactly 12 days before the next rotation. Shanghai. Shanghai, I repeated, feeling the weight of the word. He turned off the engine, plunging the truck into darkness. He looked over at me, his face softened by the ambient moonlight. So, Eleanor Vance, he murmured, did you regret it? Trading your peace for chaos? I shook my head slowly. I regretted the lack of proper walking shoes, perhaps, but not the journey. Reached across the console, his large hand resting near my knee. He didn't touch me, but the proximity was electric. Good, he said, his voice low and intense, because I need to apologize for something else. What is that? I asked, my breath catching. I broke the rules, he admitted, his thumb gently brushing the fabric of my trousers. I know this was supposed to be strictly professional, but spending 48 hours with you, watching you talk about the history of Santiago with the same passion you use for petunias, it wasn't professional for me. He finally let his hand rest on my knee, the warmth radiating through the fabric. I like the chaos of the sky, he confessed, but I think I like the order of your company even more. It centers me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I should pull away. I should remind him of the boundaries. But I couldn't move. I hadn't felt this desired, this seen, in over a decade. I'm going to kiss you now, Eleanor, he whispered, his eyes searching mine for permission. Unless you tell me no. The silence in the truck was profound, deeper than any silence in my garden. It was the silence of a life-changing direction. You are breaking the contract, Captain Sterling, I managed, my voice unsteady. I know, he breathed, leaning closer. Blame the altitude. His lips found mine. The kiss was tired, urgent, and profoundly tender. It tasted faintly of coffee and foreign air, a flavor entirely unique to him. It wasn't the kiss of a stranger. It was the kiss of a man who understood the precise depth of the roots he was trying to upend. He pulled back, resting his forehead against mine. "I need to sleep for the next 20 hours, he whispered, "and you need to get back to your roses. But in 12 days, Eleanor, we're going to Shanghai, and I promise you, I will respect your boundaries on the ground." He pulled away, got out of the truck, and retrieved my suitcase. The moment of intimacy was over, replaced by the familiar routine of logistics. I stepped out onto my driveway, my legs shaky. "Good night, Owen," I said, my voice barely a thread. "Good night, Eleanor," he replied, his blue eyes intense in the moonlight. "Don't forget to check the pH level on the jasmine. It likes slightly acidic soil." He waited until I was safely inside and the door was locked before he drove off. I stood in my kitchen, the silence rushing back in, but it was no longer emerald green. It was a restless, turbulent blue, the color of Owen's eyes and the vast unknown sky. I had traded my sanctuary for the world, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't go back. The silence that followed Owen's kiss was not the deep, restorative emerald I cherished. It was a chaotic, humming silence, vibrating with the ghost of his touch and the distant roar of a jet engine. I stood in my kitchen, my back pressed against the counter, tasting coffee and international air. He needed to sleep for 20 hours, and I needed to tend my roses. That was the reality of our bizarre, time-warped relationship. The next 12 days were excruciatingly slow. I threw myself into the garden with maniacal energy, fertilizing, weeding, and pruning. My hands were busy with the familiar, calming rhythm of the earth. But my mind was perpetually airborne. I found myself checking my email obsessively. Owen was true to his word. He was sleeping. But when he finally woke up, his replies came fast and furious, arriving in my inbox at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. To Eleanor Vance. Subject: Shanghai itinerary update. I just finalized the flight plan. We're taking the polar route. It's faster but colder. Bring proper thermal socks. I don't want my cultural attaché getting frostbite. P.S. How is the jasmine? Did you manage to find the slightly acidic soil blend? I noticed you haven't mentioned the roses. Are we still fighting about the neem oil? I would write back equally brief, factual responses, maintaining the professional distance I knew we needed, yet allowing a crack of warmth to show. 2. Owen Sterling. Subject: Shanghai itinerary update. The jasmine is thriving, thank you. I utilized the custom soil blend you provided. As for the roses, the neem oil was applied. The black spots have receded. Your observation was, regrettably, correct. His immediate response. 2. Eleanor Vance. Subject: Shanghai itinerary update. I knew it. Don't worry, Eleanor. I won't tell your hydrangeas you took advice from a cargo pilot. See you Saturday. Prepare for chaos. The anticipation was a physical ache. The world was no longer contained within my stone walls. It was vast, exciting, and waiting for me in the person of a man who lived in reverse. The departure for Shanghai was smoother, almost routine. I arrived at the cargo hub with my small, perfectly packed suitcase, wearing the appropriate thermal layers. Owen, in full uniform, met me with a smile that was less tired and more genuinely welcoming. "Welcome aboard, Eleanor," he said, taking my bag. There was an ease between us now, a silent acknowledgement of the kiss that had shattered our initial formality. "The flight plan is finalized, Captain?" I asked, falling naturally into the rhythm of his professional life. "Locked in. We're moving specialized solar panels, highly sensitive equipment, which means we fly high and smooth." This time the flight was different. Instead of sitting stiffly in the jump seat, I spent time in the crew rest area, sharing thick, lukewarm coffee with Owen during his brief breaks. We talked about his time in the Air Force, his brief, failed marriage to a woman who couldn't handle the schedule, and the profound loneliness of always being in transit. "It's hard to build anything lasting when your life is measured in layovers," he confessed, leaning back against the narrow bunk, the engine hum vibrating through the floor. "I spent 6 years building a life that was measured in silence and permanence," I countered softly. "And I realize now that too much permanence can also be a kind of loneliness." He reached out, his hand finding mine in the dim light of the cabin. His touch was warm, reassuring, and necessary. "We're two ships passing in the international flight path, Eleanor," he murmured, his thumb tracing the veins on my wrist. "Let's just enjoy the ports while we have them." In Shanghai, the contrast between our worlds was even sharper than in Santiago. The city was a relentless, vertical explosion of glass and neon, a testament to speed and modernization. My carefully curated English aesthetic felt utterly foreign here. Owen had a longer layover this time, 36 hours. "Where first, guide?" he asked as we stepped out of the high-speed maglev train, the wind whipping my hair. "The U Garden," I instructed immediately. "We need contrast. We need history. We need green space." The U Garden was an oasis of classical Chinese architecture, rockeries, and ponds, nestled amidst the skyscrapers. We walked slowly, side by side, the rhythm of our steps perfectly synchronized. Owen, usually so coiled and restless, seemed to relax completely when surrounded by the meticulous order of the landscaping. "This is incredible," he said, pausing by a massive ancient stone archway covered in wisteria. "It's like someone took a deep breath and decided to create stillness right in the center of the storm." "Gardens are about control, Owen," I explained, running my hand over the rough stone. "They are about imposing order on nature, but sometimes nature imposes its own beautiful chaos." He looked at me, his blue eyes intense. "Sounds like us." That evening, he took me to dinner overlooking the Bund, the glittering skyline of Pudong spread out before us like a futuristic painting. We were far above the noise, suspended between the ground and the sky. Owen was charming, attentive, and fully present. He asked about Arthur not out of curiosity, but out of a genuine desire to understand the life I had left behind. "Did you ever regret not traveling more with him?" he asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I regret not being brave enough," I admitted, looking out at the glittering city. "I was always afraid of upsetting the routine. I was afraid of the inconvenience." "There is no inconvenience in my world, Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping. "There is only logistics, and I handle all the logistics." He reached across the table, taking my hand. This time, there was no pretense of professional distance. "I want to show you the world. I want to see your face when you see something truly beautiful for the first time." Later, walking back toward the hotel through the quiet older streets, he stopped me beneath a canopy of unfamiliar trees, the air thick with the scent of night blooms. He didn't ask for permission this time. He simply pulled me gently toward him, resting, his hands on my hips. His kiss was deeper, less tentative than the one in the truck. It was a kiss that acknowledged the 12 days of separation and the profound, strange intimacy we had cultivated thousands of miles away from home. It was a beautiful, elegant moment, filled with the promise of more, but always constrained by the clock. "I want to stay up all night talking to you, Eleanor," he whispered against my hair, pulling back slightly. "But I have a pre-flight checklist at 4 a.m. and I need to be lucid." "Go," I instructed, my voice husky. "The logistics are paramount." We returned to the hotel, where we had adjacent rooms again, but this time, before I closed my door, he waited. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, his blue eyes warm with emotion. "Good night, Owen." He stepped closer, and instead of kissing me, he simply rested his forehead against mine, a gesture of deep, weary connection. "Don't forget to look out the window tonight. Shanghai's beautiful in the dark." Went into my room, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with jet lag. I looked out the window, and the city light seemed to pulse with a new, thrilling energy. The Shanghai trip set the pattern. 2 weeks of meticulous gardening, detailed planning, and email exchanges, followed by 48 to 72 hours of intense global intimacy. The next trip was Helsinki, Finland. Owen was transporting specialized maritime navigation equipment. Helsinki was all clean lines, cool air, and the quiet dignity of Nordic architecture. It was here, under the pale, endless light of the subarctic summer, that the true depth of our connection began to form. We arrived just as the sun dipped toward the horizon, but refused to set, the midnight sun Owen had promised. We stood on the deck of a ferry crossing the archipelago, the water slate grey, the air crisp. The light was surreal, bathing everything in a golden eternal glow. It's impossible, I breathed, pulling my cashmere wrap tighter. The sun is simply refusing to follow the rules. Owen stood behind me, his arms wrapped loosely around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. We were Captain Sterling and Eleanor Vance, two people who respected rules, yet were currently defying the very laws of celestial mechanics. Rules are negotiable when you get far enough north, he murmured, his voice rumbling against my ear. Just like boundaries. In Helsinki, we shared our first true confrontation about our situation. We were having dinner, fresh salmon and rye bread, in a small, brightly lit cafe. "What are we doing, Owen?" I asked, setting down my fork. He looked up, immediately alert. "We're having dinner in Finland. We're observing the midnight sun. We're defying jet lag." "No," I insisted gently. "I mean, what is this? We fly halfway around the world, we share intense, beautiful moments, and then we return home and pretend we are just neighbors who sometimes exchange gardening tips." He sighed, running a hand over the back of his neck. "I know, Eleanor. It's not sustainable." "It's intoxicating," I corrected him. "It's like living on pure adrenaline and romance. But real life requires roots. It requires shared grocery runs and predictable schedules. I am Eleanor Vance, the woman who schedules her fertilizer applications 6 months in advance." He smiled, a tired, genuine acknowledgement of my nature. "And I am Owen Sterling, the man who doesn't know what day it is half the time. I know I can't ask you to give up your life for mine, and I wouldn't ask you to wait for me indefinitely. So, we stop?" The question was a physical pain in my chest. He reached across the table, taking both of my hands. "No. We keep going until we figure out how to make the geometry work. Maybe the answer isn't that you come to the sky or I come to the ground. Maybe the answer is somewhere in the middle." "The middle is where the turbulence is, Owen," I whispered. "Then we learn to fly through it," he said firmly. We spent the rest of the evening walking along the harbour, the midnight sun turning the water to liquid gold. He kissed me, a long, quiet kiss that promised commitment despite the impossible distance and the fleeting time. Over the next few months, our rhythm became a strange, exhilarating normal. We saw Seoul, where I navigated the ancient palaces and bustling markets, while Owen secured a shipment of high-tech robotics. We saw Dubai, where the sheer audacious ambition of the city made my small English garden seem like a relic. Every trip deepened the bond. Owen learned to appreciate the subtle differences in local flora. I learned to read the complex, subtle cues of the sky and the language of aviation. He was my anchor in the chaos. I was his grounding force on the earth. The logistics of our home life also evolved. Mrs. Henderson was now a permanent fixture, fully briefed on the exotic travel schedule. In my twenties, garden was flourishing under the specialized care, a testament to the order I still maintained, even while actively abandoning it. One evening, after returning from a grueling trip to Kathmandu, where the altitude had made both of us dizzy, and the beauty of the Himalayas had been humbling, Owen came over to my house. It was a Tuesday, 8 p.m., a perfectly normal time. He knocked, and I opened the door. He was exhausted, wearing sweats and a worn t-shirt. He hadn't showered. He smelled of sweat, high-altitude air, and home. "I need to see your garden," he announced, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "It's dark," I pointed out, following him through the house. "Doesn't matter. I need to feel the dirt." We walked out onto the lawn. He knelt down immediately in front of the perennial border, pushing aside a cluster of lavender to touch the rich, cool soil. "It's real," he murmured, taking a deep breath of the damp, earthy scent. "After a week of concrete, tarmac, and thin air, I need this." He looked up at me, his eyes shadowed by fatigue but blazing with emotion. "I need you, Eleanor. The trips are incredible, but they are just layovers. You are the destination." I knelt beside him, resting my hand on his broad shoulder. "And you are the only one who reminds me that there is a world beyond this fence, Owen." We sat there in the dark, silent, for a long time, simply existing together in the space where the garden met the sky. "I have a long route coming up," he said finally, standing up and pulling me effortlessly to my feet. 2 weeks, hitting 4 continents. I'm landing in Rio, then Johannesburg, then Sydney, then Anchorage. "That sounds like a logistical nightmare," I noted. "It is? And you're coming with me?" "Of course I am," I replied, the answer automatic now. We walked back toward the house. When we reached the kitchen, the light was soft. The night-blooming jasmine, now a flourishing, healthy plant, was releasing its sweet, intoxicating fragrance. He turned to me, his hands settling on my shoulders. "I love the fact that you know the name of every plant in this yard," he said, his voice low. "And I love the fact that you no longer look terrified when I tell you we're flying into a Category 3 storm." "I have learned to trust my pilot," I said simply. He leaned in, and this time, the kiss was neither urgent nor tired. It was a kiss of deep, established affection. It was a kiss that tasted like a future. "I'm exhausted, Eleanor," he admitted, pulling back just enough to look into my eyes. "I'm going to sleep for a solid day. But before I do, I need to know something." "Ask," I whispered. "I bought the house next door for storage, for the equipment I don't use. But now, when I think of home, I don't think of the shed or the crates. I think of the smell of your garden." He paused, resting his large hand on my cheek. "When I get back from this route, I want to talk about more than just flight plans. I want to talk about blending our schedules, about merging our lives." The simplicity of his request, merging their lives, felt more terrifying than any turbulence. It meant dismantling the carefully constructed solitude I had lived in for years. "I need to see the itinerary first, Owen," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I need to know the logistics." He chuckled, a deep, satisfied sound. "Always the practical one. I'll email it to you before I crash." He kissed me again, a final, lingering promise. Then he walked out, the sound of his tired steps echoing across the lawn and toward his quiet temporary house. I watched him go, then walked to my desk. I opened the laptop, ready for the email. It arrived immediately. The attachment was a detailed multi-page flight plan, but beneath the technical jargon, there was a personal note. "Eleanor, I'm on a 20-hour sleep cycle starting now. When I wake up, I want to see a reply to this email. Not about the route, but about us. I need to know if you think we can find a permanent landing spot. P.S. Rio is in full summer bloom. Bring a hat, and maybe those sensible walking shoes you finally bought. Oh. Narrator note to audience. What advice should Eleanor give Owen about their future? Should they find a way to make the high-flying life work, or should one of them sacrifice their passion for the other? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the final part of their story. I knew my answer had to be as clear and structured as a perfectly pruned hedge, yet as ambitious as a transatlantic flight path. I couldn't ask him to clip his own wings, and I couldn't sacrifice the rich earth under my feet. The geometry had to work for both of us. I began to type, not answering the implied marriage proposal, but addressing the fundamental logistics of our shared future. To Owen Sterling, osterling, globalfreight.com. Subject re, permanent landing spot. Logistics. Owen, I have reviewed the flight plan. The Rio leg is feasible, provided we allow for 2 hours of acclimatization upon arrival. Please ensure the booking confirmation includes the requested window seat. Regarding a permanent landing spot, I agree that our current arrangement is insufficient for a lasting relationship. However, I will not ask you to choose between the sky and the earth. Your life is elevation. Mine is cultivation. We must integrate, not compromise. My condition for merging our lives is this. We establish a single, shared base of operations that is honored by both parties, regardless of the flight path. The garden remains the anchor, the sanctuary. But your time here must be fully present, and my involvement in your world must be continuous and planned. I propose a schedule where, regardless of the route or the fatigue, The first 24 hours back are dedicated to grounding, no distractions, no logistics beyond necessities. The subsequent days are for integration. The permanence, Owen, is not the house. It is the commitment to show up, whether that is in the middle of the night on my lawn or at a cargo terminal in Anchorage. If you can adhere to this schedule of scheduled permanence, then I agree to discuss a future that involves both Shanghai and my black spot-free roses. See you Saturday morning. I hit send, then shut the laptop. It was the most honest, complicated, and hopeful message I had ever written. His reply, delivered instantly, was a single word. The 4-continent trip was a crucible. It was the longest, most physically demanding journey we had undertaken. It wasn't a romantic getaway. It was a test of endurance and partnership. In Rio de Janeiro, the heat was suffocating, but the botanical garden was a riot of tropical excess. Owen, true to his word, ignored his phone for the first 12 hours, focusing entirely on the sheer vibrant green of the jungle. We walked, hand in hand, through the palm avenues, the humidity blurring the edges of my meticulous control. He was relaxed, laughing easily, soaking up the earth's energy. Johannesburg was a blur of rapid customs clearances and high-stakes meetings about heavy machinery. I stayed close, observing the complex dance of global commerce. I realized my life wasn't just about gardening. It was about precision, scheduling, and anticipating needs, skills that translated perfectly to the world of cargo. I was his logistical ballast. In Sydney, under the brilliant southern hemisphere sun, the exhaustion began to hit. We had a brief, precious evening where we sat on the harbour and simply watched the water. Owen leaned his head against my shoulder, finally admitting his fatigue. I didn't offer advice. I simply held him, offering the silent, restorative energy he craved. The final leg to Anchorage, Alaska, was the most telling. It was dark, cold, and utterly remote. Owen was transporting equipment destined for the North Slope. The environment was harsh, the work intense, and the air thin with responsibility. I stood with him in the biting wind on the tarmac, wrapped in layers of thermal gear, watching the massive containers being unloaded. "See this, Eleanor?" he yelled over the roar of the machinery. "This is the reality. It's cold, it's noisy, and it's usually 3 a.m. somewhere else." "I see it, Owen," I yelled back, meeting his gaze. "And it's necessary. It makes the silence back home worthwhile." He gave me a tired, grateful smile, a look that conveyed more than any romantic gesture. I wasn't just his companion. I was his witness. We landed back at the regional hub at 4 a.m. on a Friday. The massive truck pulled into my driveway at 5:15 a.m., just as the first grey light was touching the eastern horizon. We were utterly spent. We had crossed continents, time zones, and the equator multiple times. Owen turned off the engine. The silence returned, but this time, it was the deep, shared silence of two people who had faced the chaos together and emerged whole. 21 hours of sleep, Owen announced, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Starting now?" "Affirmative," I replied, pulling off my thick thermal gloves, but neither of us moved. "Eleanor," he began, turning to face me in the dark. "I've never felt so grounded, even after 4 continents. Thank you for making the geography work." "We are partners, Owen," I said softly. "We fly together." He reached into the pocket of his bomber jacket and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a piece of blue velvet. "I didn't have time for a proper jeweler," he admitted, his voice rough. "I got this in Anchorage. It's not a diamond." He unwrapped the velvet. Inside was a heavy, beautifully polished piece of jet black basalt, carved into the shape of a perfect miniature stone. It looked like a garden stone, but felt like a piece of the Earth's core. "It's volcanic rock," he explained. "It's solid. It's permanent. It's a piece of the Earth that survived the fire." He took my hand, his calloused thumb rubbing the smooth stone. "I want to blend the schedules, Eleanor. I want to build a life where our roots are together, even if our wings take us far apart." He didn't ask me to marry him with words, but the weight of the stone and the sincerity in his eyes was the most profound proposal I could imagine. I've already started the logistics, he continued, his voice dropping conspiratorially. While you were sleeping on the plane, I arranged for a crew to come in this morning. A crew for what, Owen? To tear down the wall, he said, meeting my startled gaze. The stone wall between our properties. I'm going to replace it with a low, decorative iron fence with a wide, arched gate. No locks, just an open path between your garden and my house, so that when I'm home, there is no boundary between us. My breath hitched. It was the perfect compromise, respecting the boundary while ensuring seamless access. It was the physical manifestation of scheduled permanence. I looked at the piece of black stone in my palm, then up at the man who had invaded my quiet life, only to make it exponentially richer. The logistics are sound, Captain Sterling, I confirmed, a wide, genuine smile finally breaking through my exhaustion. The answer is yes. He let out a long, shuddering breath, relief washing over his face. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, gentle kiss that promised quiet mornings and chaotic departures, rootedness and flight, all blended into one magnificent, unpredictable future. The next few months were the happiest of my life. Owen took his mandatory rest, sleeping for nearly 24 hours straight, and when he woke, he was fully present. The stone wall came down, replaced by the elegant iron gate. My garden expanded, flowing naturally into Owen's now tidy backyard. We built a small, shared potting shed, where the engine part had once crushed my petunias, a symbol of our integrated lives. Owen continued to fly the global routes, but now the departures were structured. I walked him to the gate, and he called me from every layover. He still brought back souvenirs, not just for me, but small, specialized soil enrichments, rare seeds, and unique gardening tools from around the globe. I, Eleanor Vance, the woman of emerald silence, had found my voice in the roar of a jet engine. I had found love in the precise, complicated logistics of a man who lived in reverse. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the night-blooming jasmine was at its peak, I would walk through the open gate, past the spot where the old wall had stood, and sit on the porch of the house next door. I'd listen to the deep, steady breathing of the man who had taught me that the most beautiful things in life aren't the ones you cultivate alone, but the ones you build together, bridging the distance between the earth and the sky. I always knew silence was a color, a deep, restorative emerald green. But now, I knew that love was a blend of hues, the stable emerald of the garden and the startling infinite blue of the sky. Thank you so much for traveling the world with Eleanor and Owen. This has been an incredible journey of logistics and love. Now it's your turn, dear listener. Please tell me in the comments below. What city are you listening from right now, and what score would you give this complete story? Your feedback helps the channel immensely. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great romances.